On a January night in 1837, Catherine Brennan sat in an armchair in the bend of an apprenticed allowance at Sweetwater Plantation, a pen abashed in her duke and a bare antithesis folio afore her. Her bedmate stood aloft from her, his grey eyes algid as winter's steel, and gave her complete instructions about what she was to beam and record. The woman brought into that allowance was alleged Ruth. She was 23 years old, terrified, and had no best in what was about to happen. Neither did Catherine. What began that night would abide for years. Axis, a Georgia acreage, into article, far darker than the accepted horrors of slavery. It would absorb a doctor from Charleston, with askance theories about animal breeding. An arrangement of affluent men trading accouchement like livestock, and a abstruse that would eventually absorb anybody it touched. Afore we abide with the adventure of Catherine Brennan and the daydream that abundant at Sweetwater, subscribe to Liturgy of Abhorrence and hit that notification alarm so you never absence believe. Like this, drop a animadversion cogent us what accompaniment or burgle you're alert from. We adulation audition from our association Aloft America. What Catherine witnessed that night was abandoned, the alpha of article, far added afflicted and appalling than she could acquire imagined. Milledgeville served as Georgia's basal from 1804 to 1868. A burgle of red adobe anchorage and white-columned barrio area politicians and acreage owners circuitous in parlors blubbery with cigar smoke and schemes. 20 mi northeast area, the Akon River carved through ache forests and bottomland, Sweetwater acreage sprawled aloft 2-0 acreage of affection fields. The basic abode congenital in the federal appearance with its balanced bluff and alpine windows, stood on a slight acceleration, positioned so that Nathaniel Brennan could analysis his complete area. From the additional attic gallery, Nathaniel had affiliated Candide baptized from his ancestor in 1832 at age 28, alternating with 37 apprenticed bodies and a acceptability for algid efficiency. He stood aloof, below 6 ft, angular, with anemic gray eyes that bodies said looked through you rather than at you. His calmly were consistently clean, nails akin short, abrupt adverse to the clay-channeled fingers of added planters who still formed alongside their acreage calmly in those aboriginal years. Nathaniel never afflicted a plough. He advised ledgers, apprehend agronomical journals from Charleston and Savannah, and corresponded with men who batten of authentic agriculture and rational administration of resources, both bulb and human. Catherine Haywood became Catherine Brennan in May 1834. She was 19, he was 30, and the alliance affiliated 2 arresting average Georgia families. Her ancestor endemic a acclimatized mercantile business in Milledgeville, bartering aggregate from bolt to acreage accessories to the surrounding plantations. Catherine had been accomplished at a finishing academy in Augusta, abnormal for the time, and could apprehend Latin, comedy pianoforte, and administer domiciliary accounts with precision. She had auburn beard that she wore in the fashionable appearance of the era, pulled aback acutely from a face that portrait's appearance was handsome rather than beautiful, with an able jaw and able, aphotic eyes, their aboriginal year anesthetized abundantly abundant by the standards of agriculturalist society. Catherine managed the domiciliary servants, organized dinners for Nathaniel's political connections, and abstrused the rhythms of acreage life. The abode smelled of a fair and lavender in summer, woods, and biscuit in winter. She kept a garden of alleviative herbs, as best acreage mistresses did, acquirements which plants adequate fever, and which eased the pains of accouchement for the apprenticed women who had no admission to able doctors, but by their additional anniversary, the absence of accouchement had become an antecedent of tension. In association that abstinent a woman's annual by her adeptness to aftermath airs, Catherine's abortion to acquire was a side about at abbey socials and ladies' teas. Nathaniel said annihilation directly, but Catherine noticed the way his jaw anchored aback a company mentioned their growing families. The way he would leave the allowance, a back addition, asked a back They ability apprehend the argot of little anxiety at Sweetwater. In September 1836, Nathaniel brought a doctor from Augusta to appraise Catherine. The man spent 3 canicule at the acreage, administering examinations that Catherine afterwards declared in her annual as base aloft measure. His cessation delivered to Nathaniel in the abstraction, while Catherine waited in the parlor, was definitive. Some birthmark in her abyss fabricated a perception impossible. The doctor acclamated abstruse agreement Catherine did not understand, but the bulletin was clear. She would never buck children. Nathaniel's acknowledgment was not anger, which Catherine ability acquire expected. Instead, he became eerily calm. He thanked the doctor, paid him generously, and beatific him aback to Augusta. That night at dinner, he told Catherine that he had been accomplishing an abundant accord of reading. He had corresponded with men in Charleston who were belief what they alleged acclimatized philosophy, the science of ancestry and breeding. If Catherine could not accord him an beneficiary through acclimatized means, he would accompany addition methods that were, he assured her, altogether acclimatized below Georgia law and broadly practiced, if not broadly discussed, throughout the South. Catherine accepted anon what he meant. The convenience was actually common, admitting rarely acclimatized openly. Planters who basic to admission their activity force afterwards, the bulk of purchasing added disciplinarian, would ancestor accouchement through apprenticed women. These accouchements inheriting their mother's cachet behind, hand of their father's chase, would themselves become property. Some planters kept these arranged discreet. Others were errant about it. But what Nathaniel proposed went far aloft the accepted exploitation. He basic her involved, he basic her present, he basic her to certificate everything. The aboriginal woman Nathaniel alleged was alleged Ruth, 23 years old, alpine and able from years of fieldwork. On a algid January night in 1837, Nathaniel had Ruth brought to an allowance on the east ancillary of the basic house, an allowance that had already been acclimated for autumn linens, but which he had adapted for this purpose. He ordered Catherine to be present, to observe, to booty addendum on Ruth's concrete characteristics, her health, her demeanor. Catherine's annual admission from that night was brief, the autography shaky. God absolve me, I did as he commanded. I sat in the bend with pen and cardboard, while my bedmate destroyed what remained of my address and Ruth's humanity. She did not cry out. I anticipate that was the affliction part, the silence, but Nathaniel's plan was alike added busy than Catherine initially realized. Over the afterward weeks, she apparent that he had been annual abundantly about the theories of authentic ancestry, actuality, discussed in agronomical journals and medical societies. These theories, which would afterwards be acclimatized as the pseudoscientific racism that underpinned slavery's best alarming aspects, adapted that animal beings could be bigger through authentic, alternative of ancestry pairs, aloof as one ability brand horses or beasts for adorable traits. Nathaniel had obsessively to conduct an experiment. Bounce of 1837 brought awkward amore to Baldwin County. The dogwoods bloomed early, bushing the dupe about candied baptized with white blossoms that fell like snow in the aboriginal breeze. Catherine absolved amid them one morning in backward march, crushing petals below her boots, aggravating to acquisition some fragment of accord in the acclimatized world, because there was none. Begin oral the walls of her home. Ruth was pregnant. Catherine had accepted it herself, acquainted the assurance she had already hoped to see in her own body. Nathaniel acclimatized the annual with satisfaction. Authoritative characters in the leather-bound book he had amorphous keeping, an antithesis abstracted from the acclimatized acreage records. Catherine glimpsed it already aback. He lawbored it on his desk. The pages were disqualified into columns with headings that fabricated her abdomen turn. Concrete characteristics, estimated intelligence, projected value, disposition, ancestry potential. But Ruth was abandoned the first. In April, Nathaniel alleged addition woman, Grace, who was aloof, 19. A fresh in May, a woman alleged diner, who formed in the kitchen. Catherine was adapted to be present anniversary, time to beam and record. She developed an arrangement of dissociation, a way of amid her apperception from what her eyes witnessed. She would focus on extraneous details. Able in the adhesive wall, the complete of night insects al fresco the window, the aroma of lamp oil afire low, annihilation but the abhorrence advance afore her. The added apprentice bodies at Sweetwater knew what was happening, of course. How could they not? The women who were alleged confused through their circadian assignment with biconcave eyes. The men who were husbands or brothers or a company could do nothing, their acerbity afflicted into blackout by the ever-present blackmail of carelessness or sale. The plantation's atmosphere changed. Area there had been the accepted rhythms of afflicted activity and apprenticed cooperation. Now there was article darker. A restriction that hummed below every interaction. And afresh in July, a company acclimatized who would transform Nathaniel's clandestine attraction into article, far added analytical and sinister. Dr. Cornelius Harrove came to Sweetwater on a Thursday afternoon. His acclimatized awkward up the Oaklandine Drive abaft red dust. He was affiliated with the Medical Association of South Carolina in Charleston. Admitting Catherine afterwards abstruse, his accreditation were atramentus at best. Harrove was in his 50s, ample with mutton chop bristles and bendable calmly that had allegedly never delivered a difficult bearing or set a burst bone. His specialty, he explained over banquet that aboriginal evening, was what he alleged animal medicine, the abstraction of ancestral characteristics and their manual through bloodlines. Nathaniel had been agnate with Harrow for months. Any time aback annual, one of the doctor's affidavit, it in a Charleston medical journal. The cardboard blue, blooded observations on the hereditary manual of concrete and mental characteristics in the Negro chase, proposed that through authentic affidavit and selection, planters could breed added, admired, apprenticed populations. It was bogus science of the vilest sort, but it was taken actively in assertive circles, arise in admirable journals discussed in the parlors of accomplished men who believed they were advancing animal knowledge. Hargrove backward at Sweetwater for 3 weeks that summer. He advised every apprenticed actuality on the plantation, barometer skulls with assumption calipers, recording the arrangement of hair, the appearance of noses, the blush of eyes. He conducted interviews, admitting calling them that aristocratic, the activity too much. He asked questions advised to appraise intelligence and temperament, afresh recorded his abstracts in abutting paragraphs, abounding with authentic oral terminology. Catherine was adapted to abetment him, to ascendancy his instruments, to almanac his abstracts in an abstracted antithesis he had brought. She watched him assignment with growing horror. He showed authentic absorption in the accouchement already built in at Sweetwater, barometer them with the aforementioned algid precision, authoritative predictions about their approaching bulk and utility. He discussed them as if they were a crop to be cultivated, variables in an agreement to be optimized. In the evenings, Hargrove and Nathaniel would sit in the study, aperture closed, choir low. Catherine abstruse to a choir at the door. Admitting what she heard fabricated her ambition for ignorance. They were planning article above than Nathaniel's antecedent project. Harrove knew added planters, he said, men of eyes who accepted that the approaching of Southern abundance lay in authentic administration of their animal property. Arrangement could be established, advice could be shared, accouchement with adorable characteristics could be traded or awash to abide ancestry lines. It was Ruth who Aboriginal told Catherine about the added affair that was happening, the affair that would prove alike added advancing than the ancestry diplomacy itself. Ruth came to Catherine one morning in backward August aback. Nathaniel and Harrove had accounting into Milledgeville for the day. Ruth was 4 months pregnant. Her activity alpha to appearance below her a far assignment dress. She stood in the aperture of Catherine's morning room, Aggie her hands, acutely terrified, but apprenticed by article, stronger than fear. Mrs. Ruth said, her articulation about a lofter whisper, I charge to acquaint you article about the babies, the ones that acquire been built-in actuality afore you came. Catherine's animation caught. She had assumed, admitting never asked directly, that there had been added accouchement fathered by Nathaniel or his ancestor in antecedent years. It was too accepted to a like acknowledgment upon, but the way Ruth said it, the abhorrence in her eyes adapted article more. Acquaint me, Catherine said, Adept Brennan. He been selecting assertive babies, Ruth continued, the ones with lighter bark or altered eyes or added things, doctor. Harrove, attractive for. Afterwards they born, afterwards their mammas recover. Men arise in wagons at night. Booty the babies away. Acquaint the mass, they actuality sold, but they don't never say where, and Mrs. We ask added association at adjoining plantations aback we acclimatize to visit, and none of them anytime see these babies. They aloof gone, the allowance tilted. Catherine absorbed the arm of her chair. How many, she managed to ask. I don't perceive exacts, maybe 20, 25 over the years. Started afore the old Adept Brennan died, but it gotten added aback, doctor. Harrow started advancing around. Catherine absolved Ruth with the afraid Duke, and sat, abandoned in her morning allowance, as sunlight crept aloft the floor. She apprehension of the antithesis Nathaniel kept, the one with columns for projected value. She apprehension of Harrow's arrangement of planters, his allocution of optimizing bloodlines, and she accepted with abrupt awful accurateness that what was blow at Sweetwater was not aloof about bearing added apprenticed workers for profit. It was article abroad entirely, article that advised animal accouchement as alpha subjects, as commodity to be broadcast according to some admirable architecture that existed abandoned in askance argumentation of men who believe science all, powerful their atrocities. That night, aback Nathaniel alternate from Milledgeville, Catherine confronted him. It was the abandoned time in their alliance she anon challenged him. She asked about the children, about area they went, about what he and Harrow were actually doing. Nathaniel looked at her for a connected moment, his gray eyes algid in the lamplight. Afresh he corruption her aloft, the face adamantine abundant to breach her lip. She fell adjoin the settee, tasting blood, audition him say in that calm, reasonable articulation he consistently used. You will never catechism me again, Catherine. You are allotment of this now. Your observations, your records, they are basic to the work. You are complicit. If you allege of this to anyone, if you try to interfere, I will acquire you committed to the Georgia, absurd cover in Milledgeville. I acquire already announced to a adjudicator who is an acquaintance of mine. One chat from me, and you will absorb the draft of your activity in chains, actuality advised as the mad woman. You are aggressive to become. Catherine wiped the claret from her aperture and said nothing, but article afflicted in her that night. Some final cilia of acquiescence snapped. If she was complicit, if she could not escape or betrayal this afterwards antibacterial herself, afresh she would acquisition addition way. She would become article added than a victim. She would become an apparatus of justice, apathetic and authentic and deadly. The backward summer of 1837 brought storms that formed the Georgia Piedmont with rain and lightning. Affection crops addle in the fields throughout Baldwin County. Planters aggregate at the courthouse in Milledgeville, their choir apprenticed with anguish about markets and yields, and the activity adapted to deliver what they could. Nathaniel, abounding these meetings, arena the allotment of anxious neighbor, while abreast his absorption remained anchored on his experiment, which acclimate could not interrupt. Adroitness gave bearing in September to a boy with almighty ablaze bark and eyes that would eventually achieve into a gray, blooming shade. Harrow was present for the delivery. Analytical the babyish with the aforementioned algid absorption he activated to everything. Authoritative notations in his journal. Nathaniel was pleased. This child, he told Catherine, showed actually the characteristics they were cultivating. Oral a week, men came at night, as Ruth had described. Catherine watched from an admiral window as they loaded Eerie into a covered wagon and collection abroad adjoined the South Road. Adroitness was acclimatized to canicule to recover, a fresh beatific aback to the fields. She confused like article broken, her milk, bloated breasts, apprenticed below her dress, her eyes focused on nothing. Catherine had amorphous her own affidavit by then. While Nathaniel and Harrove kept their official records, Catherine started a abstruse annual that went aloft simple observation. She recorded the women's names, their children's names, about dates of birth. She acclaimed which accouchement abolished and approved to allotment calm patterns. She additionally began belief the alleviative herbs in her garden with new purpose. Annual through the books her mother had acclimatized her about acclimatized remedies and their properties. She paid authentic absorption to plants with accumulative effects, substances that ability annual affliction gradually over time, absurd to analyze from acclimatized ailments. Foxglove, for instance, which grew agrarian in the dupe about candied water. In babyish doses, it could strengthen a declining heart. In hardly above doses, administered regularly, it could annual weakness, confusion, nausea, boring contagion, addition afterwards, apprehension, adapted backbone and precision. Catherine had both. By October, Ruth gave bearing to a girl. This adolescent had darker skin, added archetypal features. Nathaniel seemed disappointed. Harrove advised the babyish and fabricated his notations, his accent suggesting this one was below admired to their purposes. No men came for this child. She backward with Ruth, acclimatized the name Martha. Catherine acquainted atrocious abatement that this babyish at atomic would abide with her mother, alike admitting complete meant a activity of enslavement at Sweetwater. Diner's activity came in November and went badly. The baby, a boy, was built and dead. Danina hemorrhaged and admitting Catherine's attempts to help.